Everything happened in a matter of seconds. During a live broadcast, an Australian journalist was struck by a rubber bullet fired by officers of the Los Angeles Police Department while covering the protests from the city streets. The scene was captured on camera, leaving thousands of viewers stunned as chaos took over. Despite wearing visible press credentials and being accompanied by her technical crew, the reporter was hit by a non-lethal projectile that, as seen in the video, was fired without warning. The impact was direct, causing the journalist to lose her balance and cry out in pain in front of the camera. The footage quickly spread across social media, sparking outrage among users who couldn't believe a media professional had been assaulted in such a way while doing her job. Criticism came swiftly, particularly directed at the behavior of law enforcement officers and the treatment of reporters in contexts where freedom of the press should be protected. This incident has reignited the debate over the use of force by authorities during demonstrations and has placed the vulnerability of journalists at the center of the conversation, even in countries that claim to be democratic. What was most shocking wasn't just the shot itself, but the coldness of the act. There was no warning, no attempt at dialogue. The officers simply advanced through the crowd, firing rubber projectiles as they cleared the streets on horseback. In the middle of that advance, the journalist, who clearly posed no threat, was struck. The pain was immediate, and so was the confusion. Through the camera lens, viewers could see her struggling to stay on her feet, staggering as her cameraman kept recording. Around her, protesters were fleeing and shouting. The air was thick with tension. But what defined that moment was the raw reality of seeing a member of the press attacked by those who are meant to protect her. The footage quickly went viral. Dozens of accounts shared the video across platforms like Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Within hours, international media outlets were reporting on the case. Human rights organizations and advocates for freedom of expression condemned the incident, calling it a direct attack on journalism. Many voices began to question what was happening in Los Angeles. Was this part of a broader pattern? Was it an isolated incident or a sign of how certain institutions are increasingly hostile toward the critical eye of the press? The questions began to multiply, and with them, the pressure on local authorities. Meanwhile, the video continued to rack up millions of views. The image of the reporter recoiling in pain, her face marked by shock and helplessness, became a symbol of something much greater: the fragility of press freedom, even in societies that claim to protect it. The reactions came quickly. From public figures to ordinary users, people began tagging the Los Angeles Police Department demanding answers. How was it possible that in a city considered a symbol of freedom and civil rights, a journalist could be attacked live on air? The hashtag with the reporter's name and phrases like freedom of the press began trending among the top global topics. Meanwhile, the Australian network for which the reporter worked confirmed that she and her cameraman were there performing their journalistic duties, and that everything they carried, from press credentials to equipment, complied with legal requirements for covering public events. There was absolutely no reason for them to be treated as a threat. Outrage intensified as it became clear this wasn't an isolated incident. Other journalists, both local and international, began sharing their own experiences from similar protests. Destroyed cameras, shoving, veiled threats, and even brief arrests. A disturbing pattern was emerging. Journalistic coverage was being seen by some police forces not as a right, but as a threat. Various international organizations raised their voices. The Committee to Protect Journalists, CPJ, Reporters Without Borders, and Human Rights Watch issued statements demanding an independent investigation. They called for the identification of the officer responsible for the shooting and for clear disciplinary measures to be taken. More importantly, they urged a re-evaluation of law enforcement protocols during protests to ensure the safety of journalists. Meanwhile, the injured reporter received medical attention. She suffered a severe bruise on her hip and contusions on her leg, but according to sources close to her, she was out of danger. Still, the emotional impact ran deep, not just because of the physical pain, but because of the feeling that she had been targeted not in spite of being a journalist, but because of it. The footage of the incident was already being analyzed by experts. Several videos captured from different angles confirmed that there had been no provocation by the press team. The shot was deliberate, or at the very least recklessly fired, and that changed everything. Out on the streets, the protests continued, but now, alongside signs demanding social justice, new slogans emerged. Protecting the press is protecting the truth. Don't shoot the journalists. And if they silence the press, who will tell us what's happening? The incident not only exposed a local issue, but also reignited a global debate. Are journalists truly protected in modern democracies? What happened in Los Angeles, a city that prides itself on being a hub of diversity, free expression, and civil rights, sent a disturbing message to the rest of the world. International media outlets such as the BBC, Al Jazeera, Deutsche Welle, and France 24 picked up the story. Some described it as a clear violation of fundamental rights, while others compared the event to authoritarian practices typically condemned by the West when they occur in countries with repressive regimes. In Australia, the reporter's home country, the issue escalated to the national parliament. Several senators demanded a formal diplomatic note be sent to the US Embassy. The Australian foreign minister even offered legal assistance to the affected journalist and asked for assurances that this would not happen again. The outrage crossed oceans. In the United States, the atmosphere was just as tense. Multiple newsrooms published strong editorials of condemnation. "If they shoot one of us, they shoot all of us," wrote a prominent columnist in the Washington Post. The New York Times released a follow-up investigation revealing that in the past 5 years, more than 230 assaults on journalists had been documented during protest coverage on US soil, an alarming statistic. The television network the reporter works for announced it would take legal action. "We're not going to let this slide as just another operational mistake," said one of the network's news directors. He added, "Our reporters are there to show the truth, not to become targets." But while legal and political debates intensified, something else began to shift: public perception. In many sectors of society, the official narrative of preserving order was losing strength in the face of a new realization: that the real danger wasn't the protest itself, but the impunity with which certain law enforcement officers acted against those who observe and report the facts. Civil rights advocacy groups organized parallel marches in defense of press freedom. These protests weren't asking for special favors or privileges, but for something basic: that journalists be allowed to do their work without becoming targets. Signs with slogans like "Cameramen, not criminals," and "You can't silence the truth with bullets" began to fill the streets. And as the protests continued, so did the unanswered questions. Who was the officer who fired the shot? What orders was he following? Why was someone clearly identified as press allowed to be shot? And what will happen to those responsible? As more details came to light, it became evident that this was not an isolated incident. The video of the assault on the journalist became irrefutable evidence of a troubling pattern. When the eyes of the world are on a conflict, when the streets burn with outrage and the public demands answers, some would rather silence the cameras than face the truth. The footage was analyzed by human rights experts, lawyers, even war veterans familiar with engagement protocols. They all agreed on one thing: what appeared on screen was an unjustifiable act of aggression. There was no threat, no provocation, just a woman with a microphone and a camera doing what millions around the world consider a cornerstone of any democracy: reporting. The journalist, who chose not to make any immediate public statements, was far more eloquent in her actions. Just a few days later, she reappeared, still visibly bruised on her leg, to continue covering the protests. No speech, no resentment, no desire for attention, just one goal: to keep telling the stories that others would rather keep in the dark. And that image, a woman with a camera, limping but determined, became a symbol, a silent resistance that reminded everyone that freedom of the press is not something you ask for, it's something you practice. That truth, even when uncomfortable, has a right to be seen, and that journalists are not enemies of order, but guardians who ensure that power is observed, questioned, and held accountable. Eventually, the pressure worked. The LAPD chief issued a statement promising an internal investigation, and the Department of Justice announced it would monitor the process closely. While many remain skeptical, public scrutiny is now a safeguard against the case being quietly buried. This episode leaves an uncomfortable question: if this happened in Los Angeles, in front of cameras and with international media present, what might be happening in places without witnesses? And more importantly, what kind of future are we building if we normalize punishing those who expose wrongdoing and protecting those who commit it? Now more than ever, journalism must be defended, not just by those who practice it, but by every citizen who believes in truth, justice, and freedom. And now, I ask you, what do you think about this case? Do you believe it was an accident or an intentional act to silence? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. I want to hear from you. And if you value this kind of content, if you believe it's important that these stories don't disappear into indifference and oblivion, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon, and share this video, because information is power, and silence is complicity.